Hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Politics. This week, well, first off, I have to tell you uh, the news stories that I would normally have covered, I'm just bored with. I'm tired of hearing about the Mueller report. I'm tired of hearing about all of the other silliness that's going on. There are major issues that need to be thought about and dealt with, and I just felt like they weren't getting dealt with. One of the ones that I think has a potential to be a very, very big problem is Venezuela. Now, what I want to do today is I want to devote the entire show today to Venezuela. I want to start by kind of briefly giving an analysis of what has happened in Venezuela, how we got to where we are today, how bad I believe it is and could potentially get. And then I want to go through, and I've given this a lot of thought. I've done a lot of research on this. And I guess I should tell you, as a right winger, I am also a military hawk. I was all for chasing down terrorists anywhere in the world. I didn't care how many wars we had to have: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, wherever we got to get them, go kill them. That was my philosophy, and I still believe that. However, I think in Venezuela, I think we can do what needs to be done and maybe not have to fire a shot. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so 13 years ago, Venezuela is a very rich country. They were the third most prosperous economy on the planet, behind only the United States and China. They had the largest oil reserves of any country on the planet, including Saudi Arabia. They have the second largest gold reserves of anybody on the planet. That is a very wealthy country. Okay. So Hugo Chavez gets himself elected, then nationalizes the oil companies and other industries and becomes a socialist country. Now, as with any time socialism happens, there are many, many promises made up front. And he made the promises, and he kept a lot of them, and he was a likable individual to the Venezuelans. So they got behind him, and he was passing out free stuff. He got cancer, and he died. And before he died, he made very, very close alliances with Cuba. Now, you may or may not know, Cuba is used to be socialist, is now a communist country with hints of socialism. But Hugo Chavez made close alliances with Cuba, and Cuba would send military people over there to help him establish a socialist country and to keep it a socialist country. We have not allowed, this country has something called the Monroe Doctrine, and we do not allow foreign countries from across the ocean any access to any country in this hemisphere. That's why we kicked Russia out of Cuba. So Hugo Chavez builds a close relationship with Castro. Castro sends military people there to prop him up and to show him the ropes on how to be a dictator. Then Chavez dies. He picks his hand-selected puppet to take over, Maduro. Maduro fixes the elections because Maduro had studied under Chavez, so he knew how to fix the elections. He fixed the elections, he won, but the United States knew they were fixed, and we have backed his opponent, and I can't remember the guy's name, but we have backed him. He is in exile right now, uh, not out of the country, but out of the government. He, I believe he held a post in the Congress down there, ran for the presidency. Officially, he lost, but we knew the election was fixed, so we backed him, and we told Maduro he's got to go. Okay? So what happens? Well, Maduro, being and having been trained to be a dictator, said nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'll decide if and when I need to go. And right now ain't that time. I'm here. I'm loud. I'm proud. I'm staying. Deal with it. In the meantime, he contacts Cuba, and Cuba sends over. Now, okay, let me back up a second. Just about any socialist country on the planet, I can't say all because I haven't researched all, but the ones that I know of all rely on the military for their power. If the military backs the strong man, he stays in power. If not, the strong man goes down and the military takes over. That's usually how it works. And at the initial beginning, the military was standing with Maduro. So you ask yourself, well, how did he persuade them to do that? Well, when you nationalize the businesses that are in the country, okay, as an example, the Conoco oil company was down there. He nationalized it. What that means is he took it over by force from Conoco. And all of the other little gas stations and other businesses that the government took over, the president, Maduro and Chavez, would pass out these businesses to their military leaders as a reward. Okay? So General so-and-so gets this oil company, General so-and-so gets this oil company, and Corporal so-and-so gets this gas station, you see? So, and then the president gets a cut off of everything that these guys are doing. So everybody's in business, everybody's making money. So as long as he stays in power, everybody's making money. Okay. So the election comes, we back the other guy, Maduro's got to go. And Maduro says, no, the military is standing with me. They stand. But Maduro is not taking any chances. So he contacts Cuba, and Cuba sends over a lot of military to help prop up the Venezuelan military. So now we have Cuban military and Venezuelan military keeping the Venezuelan people down. Now, one of the things that has to happen, which is what we're going through here in this country, before a country can go socialist or communist, they have to confiscate all the arms from the people. Chavez did that. The people down there have no guns. Okay? So they have no guns. They've nationalized the businesses. When the people started rioting, and they were rioting in the streets, again, because the government controls the food supply and the grocery stores, and they control everything, all the dictator has to do is stop sending food. Because pretty soon your people are going to starve to death. And then you start trickling in food. Because at this point now, your people are concentrating on just eating and not fighting. And that's where a strong man wants his people. So the United States stepped in and we decided we're going to ship food down there. So we shipped food down there. The Venezuelan military intercepted it and burned it. He doesn't want his people fed. He doesn't want his people armed, and he doesn't want his people thinking. Now, as we go through this, I want you to keep in mind Venezuela could be a microcosm of this country. The left has been trying to take our arms and greatly restrict our arms for decades. And they continue to do so because that has to happen before they can go full on socialism here. Because when socialism happens, they will take over the production, the means of production, albeit it may be slower than they did in Venezuela, but it will happen. Okay? So now we've got the Venezuelan government military and Cuban military. So Maduro decides, okay, I'm going to contact Russia. So Russia, also socialist, sends over some men, not a lot, some advisors, but mostly sends over military equipment. Now, I haven't been able to find out what type of military equipment. My guess would be surface-to-air missiles, some aircraft, and probably some ships. I don't know the ships, but I'm pretty sure about the aircraft and the ground-to-air missiles, and probably armor for the military. Now, this was quite a few weeks ago. We don't know how many, I mean, I'm sure the government does, but I don't know how many shipments the Russians have made in there. I don't know how much equipment they've got. I don't know how many men they've got. But the fact that they're there is alarming. Now, he also contacted China, communist country. They sent over men and money. I don't know what these men are doing. They're not military men. My guess is they're going to be planners, military planners, like, you know, bridges and plans on how to plan a battle, is my guess. So now, in a country in South America that is in our hemisphere, now, so you say, okay, so what is the motivation? Remember, Venezuela is very, very wealthy. The oil is what the Russians want. The gold is what the Chinese want. If you look at the Chinese record over the last 2 decades, they have been going around the world, specifically in Africa, and buying up every gold mine they can find, and every precious metal that they can find, they are buying and taking into China. That's why our aluminum prices are higher here. That's why, and they've been doing that and then flooding our market with cheap steel. So the Russians want the oil, which I'm sure is part of the deal, and the Chinese want the gold, and Maduro wants to stay in power. So everybody's raping and pillaging that country, and the people are starving, and nobody cares. Okay, so that's pretty much where we are now. So if you look at it from the Venezuelan people, okay, they have no food to eat. That's part of socialism. They have no guns to defend themselves. Only the military has the guns, which is what the U.S. wants to have happen here. Their money is worthless. I mean, if they had any food to buy, it would take a wheelbarrow full of Venezuelan dollars to buy a loaf of bread. It is just absolutely worthless, so they can't buy anything even if they can find it. And they have very limited electricity. It started with rolling blackouts, but now it's pretty much, the electricity is pretty much a hit or miss. And you ask yourself, why the electricity? Well, if you have no electricity and you can't see, you can't fight. Only the military will have the lights. Only the military will have the guns. Only the military will have the food. And the Venezuelan people will have nothing, nothing to fight with, nothing to defend themselves with. That's what's going on in Venezuela. Now, this is in our hemisphere. These are socialist and communist countries are coming into our hemisphere, in our own backyard and propping up this dictator, uh, we can't allow that. We just can't have that. We cannot have Russia and China in our backyard. When they're across the planet, in order to get us, we will have a warning time. If they ship missiles or planes or boats or something, we'll have time to counter that. If they're in our backyard, they will have the ability to destroy us before we can do much of anything. We just can't allow that to happen. So the question becomes, so what do we do? Now, I can't decide if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I haven't heard a thing out of Trump. I think it's a good thing. I think he's smart enough to know that he's not going to signal what his plans are. Every time he's asked, he says everything is on the table, and that's all he says. But what I've done is I have gone through now, and if you think about these different countries that are all in play here, there is a different way that we can deal with each country to exert enough pressure and enough hurt that they might back off. You know, it would be kind of like when we had the naval blockade against Cuba. I mean, around Cuba against Russia during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, it did get very close to war, but cooler heads prevailed. And I think Russia wants the oil. I think China wants the gold, but I don't think they want a bloodbath to get it. I think their calculation is if we can bully our way, if we can intimidate our way, if we can buy our way, if in some way we can get it without having a bloodbath, then we'll take it. Otherwise, you know, we're going to come over here, set you up, do what we can. And if the U.S. looks like they're coming after us, we're out of here. I think that's where they're at. We have to give them a reason and a way to get out. So here's what I feel like we can and should do by country. Okay? When we deal with Cuba, the first step sounds like nothing, but we should go back to unrecognizing Cuba, kick their diplomats out of our country, call ours home. Now, why would we do that? Well, when Obama set this up and he recognized Cuba, it gave Cuba recognition worldwide in the United Nations. It increased the dictator's ability to bring tourists in and to ship products out. If we unrecognize them again, some of their money dries up, the tourism dries up, and they're back to where they were several years ago. That's the first thing we need to do. Now, secondly, some people will call this an act of war, but I believe we need to put a full naval blockade around Cuba. Now, why would we do that? If Cuba is going to take an aggressive stance in our hemisphere, we're going to take an aggressive stance towards them. Now, we're not interested. I wouldn't be interested in hurting the Cuban people. But on the other hand, I'm not going to allow them to retool themselves because they're shipping their stuff over to Venezuela. Every boat that comes to Cuba, we board and we inspect. If it's military or military capable, they turn their happy little butts around and go back to where they came from. If it's food or stuff for the people, then we can let it go in. And I think we should do that. I think there needs to be a list of, and it doesn't, if the food comes from Russia, it goes back to Russia. No country that has had aggression towards us should profit in any way, shape, or form from that aggression. Cuba should not benefit by receiving military or any type of products at all from China or Russia or Iraq. I mean, Iran. Iran also is supporting Venezuela, but Iran we're dealing with. So full naval blockade. And that means that every ship that comes in gets boarded and inspected by U.S. troops, not United Nations troops, U.S. troops. The UN is nothing but a bunch of crooks. U.S. inspected, approved, and either shipped back or let in. All of the cruise ships take Cuba off of their. See, right now, if you go on a cruise and they do different ports, you can get into Cuba. I think they've got like 2 ports down there that you can get into. We'll shut that off. Now, another thing that unrecognizing Cuba will do will be allow us to put strict sanctions on any part of Cuba and any people down there that we want. We can freeze every asset everywhere in the world. Now, I did a show several years ago called Sanctions Are for Sissies. They didn't mean anything. We put sanctions on Russia and Putin laughed. Well, technology has changed that. We can put sanctions down on an individual person. We also have the ability to track who's doing business with who. So let's say that we put sanctions against the Russia or the Cuban leadership in Cuba. And we tell everybody in the world, if you deal with these people right here, we're going to sanction you. And you won't have access to the U.S. banking system. You won't have access to U.S. dollars. And you won't have access to the U.S. ports because we'll stop. That will isolate Cuba. So they're taking off of the trade route, they're taking off of the shipping routes, and they're taking off of the tourism routes. Now, we have a detention center in Cuba called Gitmo. I believe we should take U.S. military troops and put them on ships and leave them in the sea around as part of the blockade. But very, very close to Gitmo, we should have many military troops prepared and ready to storm the sea or storm the land. Because if they become aggressive in Venezuela, we'll go in and knock them back to the Stone Ages, and we got to have the military there prepared to go. So dealing with Cuba, basically I would isolate them, sanction the heck out of all of them, and unrecognize them. That's how I would deal with Cuba. Now, in addition to that, I would also give them a way out. And I would say, we will lift these as we see fit as your people leave Venezuela. And we want verification of how many are there and how many have left. And as you bring more people out, we will drop more and more of our punitive actions against you, up to unrecognizing. I think we need to leave that in place. Now, when we deal with China, now the problem with China is a lot. China, in the last 2 decades, has been first taking advantage of the United States, robbing from us, and taking that money and investing in their military, buying up natural resources around the planet, starting infrastructure programs around the planet in order to rape, pillage, and plunder these other countries, Um, they've been basically a bad player, and with the goal, as their stated goal, was to be number one in every category on the planet by 2025, and they were close to doing it until Trump came into office. Now, they are struggling right now. Their economy used to be growing at an annual clip of 7%, and that was even in the worldwide downturn. But since Trump has been in office, their economy is in trouble. Um, the last I heard, they were doing between, and these are government numbers, by the way, between 2 and 3% growth and falling. So when we deal with China, there are many issues to look at, but I think this is what I would do. First off, I would send an aircraft carrier and several ships over, and their whole goal would be to patrol up and down the South China Sea. Remember, again, in the last decade, China has been hauling sand and rock out to these uninhabited islands and building them up, and then planting airports and ground to missile systems and air defense systems on these, militarizing that. And in effect, what they were doing is extending out into international water, calling that international water their water because their islands are now extended out there. And the reason they want to do that is they want to be able to control the flow of trade between there, because once they control that, then they're at will to do whatever they want. Okay. So I would take an aircraft carrier and other ships, and their whole goal is to go back and forth, right on the line of international water. And I'd take planes and I'd fly them over every day, just harass them, not cross over, but let them know that they are not in control out there. This is international water. We are in our rights, and we're going to do this, and you don't have to like it. In fact, we hope you don't like it. That would be the first thing I would do. And believe me, that doesn't sound like much, but China would be very, very irritated at that happening, because the rest of the world knows what China's doing. And if we call them out and they don't do anything, in the Chinese minds, they're going to look like losers. They don't want that. The same day I gave that order, the second order I would give is all negotiations on trade are off, and tariffs are now doubled. You want to ship something in here, and I was charging you $25 a pound, now I'm going to charge you $50 a pound. And that number is going to continue to go up until you pull your people and equipment out of Venezuela and get these islands unmilitarized. You got 90 days. In 90 days, it goes to $75 a pound. That'll get their attention real quick. They need us as a trading partner a lot more than we need them. The third order I would give on that day is all non-essential Americans in China would be advised to come home, because it would be very like China to take Americans captive and use them as a tool. Now, we wouldn't negotiate, but they would try to call our bluff on that. So I would call them home. I would advise all Americans there to come home, and I would recall all of my diplomats except essential people. And the reason you want to leave essential people there is so that you can have communication back and forth, so you're not relying totally on telephone calls. Again, I would use sanctions, and I would use them not as a shotgun, but as a rifle. I would pick the key people. Now, remember how communists keep power. Okay, they have oligarchs. And in the communist countries, they have a very well organized party system. So if you took, so it goes like this. There's Xi Jinping at the top, and then the military, and then or the Communist Party, and then the country is broken up into districts and then into towns. And the leader of the town has to collect so much money and send it to the district, and the district has to collect so much money and send it to the party, and the party has to collect so much money and send it to the president. And that's how that works. Okay. What if we took sanctions and sanctioned each leader of each town and the leader of each district and the leader of each area of the country and the Communist Party? Now they can't move the cash. They don't have access to the international banking system, which is where they're going to have to pay their bills. They don't have, it makes their life very complicated. Now they'll have to do another system and pay with a different currency. And if they don't have access to the banking system, that becomes very difficult. I would do that. On the same day that I gave that order, I would, we currently have 2 military bases in Taiwan, one in Taipei and one in the southern part of the island. I can't remember the name of it, but we'd have 2 there. The one in the south is a naval base, and the one in the north is the Air Force base. I would increase all military personnel, equipment, and intel on that island. And between Taiwan and China, which is a very short distance, I would again put the chosen aircraft carrier and other ships there. And these ships would have the capability of missiles, much like we used in Iraq. They were out in the ocean, and they could ship them hundreds of miles and hit a target within, a half a city block and totally destroy it. And that's what I would have there. And I'd have an aircraft carrier for air cover. And I would plant that and put it right off the coast of Taiwan to interfere so that China doesn't feel emboldened to come down there and use Taiwan as a pawn. In all of the areas around there, I would do the same thing. Taiwan would be the easy mark for China, but there's also South Korea, Japan, Guam, the Philippines, and I would build I would increase the military wall there. I would increase the personnel, the aircraft fighting capabilities, the missile capabilities. I would make that as impenetrable as possible, those areas. Now, having done that, having done these things to China, again, I would say, and I put it in writing, we will go back and take a look at each one of these as your people come out of Venezuela, your equipment comes out of Venezuela, and you don't come back. As your people come out, we'll lift sanctions. As you demilitarize those islands, we'll lessen sanctions. And when it's all said and done, your military is going to be out of those islands, Your equipment and your personnel are going to be out of Venezuela. And I mean all personnel, including the ones digging up the gold and the ones handling the oil and the military advisors. All Chinese in Venezuela get out. When that's done, the sanctions will be lifted, but not until then. The taxes will continue to go up 25% per pound every quarter until your people are out. You want your sanctions to go down, get your people out. That's how I would deal with China. That brings us to Russia. Again, Russia forms a bigger problem. Now, China is a much bigger economy, by the way. Russia's economy is only about the size of Italy's. So if they want to get into a piston match with us in military or banking or oil or any of that, they will lose. That's not even a question. Their military is puny. Their economy cannot withstand an arms race. Yeah. The only way they even have an economy the size of Italy's is because they have oil over there, and the United States is doing a much better job of sending oil and natural gas over there. They're even worrying about that. So the economy with them is not the problem with Russia. The problem with Russia is they are a desperate economy, just like any socialist country. The oligarchs at the top have everything, and the people down underneath have very little, if anything. Putin has been able to use the oligarchs to keep in power. And just like any socialist country, eventually there's not other people's money to deal with. The few at the top have it all, the people at the bottom have nothing, and the economy eventually stops. That's how the USSR broke up, and that's what's going on in Venezuela as we speak. So the set of problems is completely different with Russia. The concept is basically the same, but we have to be a little bit more careful and a little bit more direct with Russia. Now, I think that one of the first things that I would do is I would move massive amount of troops and military equipment to the Crimea, and close enough to where I could see the whites in the Russians' eyeballs. They come in under the Obama administration, and Obama did nothing. That guy, the leader over there came to the United States twice on bended knee begging for equipment. Obama gave him nothing. I think the last time he was here, he gave him some pukey, outdated radar system, you know. Oh, good. When the Russians come to attack us, we'll know 3 minutes before they attack. What kind of a dumb... Well, anyway, I don't want to rehash that. But we need to send over missile capabilities. Again, put ships right there on the coast, because Russia really wants to take that strait over there, and plant our military right there. And just stare them down. Just stare them down. That will intimidate Russia. Again, with the sanctions. Russia is being sanctioned to death right now. Their oligarchs are getting it. We need to take it further down the line. If he's paying those oligarchs off like most socialist countries do, then let's go down the list and let's start sanctioning them and their banking system. If a banking system does not have access to the federal banking system in the United States, that eliminates 4/5 of their trade around the planet. The only people they could trade with then is other rogue countries like Iraq and Cuba, North Korea, and there's no money there. They're not going to be able to make any money. They have to have access to our banking system. We have been sanctioning the people at the top. Let's start going down the military order. See, in China, when we were putting sanctions on, we did it in the Communist Party. hierarchy, because that's how they operate. In Russia, let's put the sanctions on the military leaders. And I don't mean just the generals. I mean, let's go generals and colonels and sergeants and sanction them all. Today, the sanctions are very easy. It's computer strokes. Once they're done, they're done. These guys cannot have access to their cash. We can freeze their bank accounts in an hour. And they don't have access to get it. That way, in order for Russia to pay their military, they would have to do it like we did in the old days. Take the cash by train down to them and hand it to them in person, because they won't have access to the banking system. We need to do that. Now, I did a show not too long ago, and because they didn't do this, we now do not have the complete access. But if you look at the border of Russia as it goes around all of the friendly countries that we have access with, I would move military in there. And in this case, I would use NATO troops, because Russia hates NATO, absolutely hates NATO. And I would move as much NATO equipment and people and everything I could. And I'd push it right up to the border. You know, like when you play a game of Risk and you go in and take a country and you just put everything you got right there. That's what I would do in Russia. I would not let them change their mind without me knowing about it. I would conduct flyovers, and I would violate their airspace, and I would tempt them to come get me. If it's a lot harder to be aggressive if you are being harassed. It's going to be a lot harder for Putin to give orders all the way across the planet to Venezuela if he's worrying about his people not being able to get paid, not being able to eat, his military. And every time he turns around, he's getting questions from his military about, can we shoot this U.S. plane down because they're in our airspace? He gets that 5 times a day. He's going to be harassed, and that's the goal. On the diplomatic front, I would go to every ally of the Russian government, even the neutral ones that do business with them, and I would start with Germany. Germany imports the last I heard was 1/3 of their total energy needs from oil and natural gas from Russia. And I would go to them and I would say, right, starting as soon as we can get the first shipment here, you will be buying all of your oil and your natural gas from us for the same price, and you're going to shut them off. And if you don't, we're going to sanction your government. And we're going to start with Angela Merkel. Now, the second that happens, Russia will feel an instant pain, because Germany imports a major percentage of the Russian oil and natural gas, which means a major source of their income comes from Germany. Not to mention the rest of the countries that we would go do that to. Now, will they jump in? Maybe, maybe not. But if they do, that will be instant pain for Putin and Russia. See, the goal here is to find the pressure point for these leaders. At what point does it become not profitable for me to be in Venezuela? I can tolerate this, I can tolerate that, I can tolerate this, but this I can't tolerate. That's the point we need to get to. And that's the point of putting all of this pressure on each individual country. Because at some point, that leader is going to say, okay, I'm either going to fight you militarily or I'm going to leave that country because I can't take this anymore. I'm done with this. That's where we have to get. That's how Kennedy got Cuba. He made it too expensive for Khrushchev to try to play with us. He made it too expensive for him to do that. And Khrushchev finally said, yeah, okay, I don't want to fight a war clear across the planet. I'm done. Bring the ships home. That's where we need to get with each one of these countries. And here is one, and even if this whole thing in Venezuela wasn't going on, this needs to be started. This should have been done. We have the technology right now to do Star Wars. And for those of you that don't know what Star Wars is, it was a plan that Ronald Reagan started. And it was the final nail in the coffin for the Russians because they were trying to keep up with us on an arms race. Okay. And at the time, we didn't have the technology, but the Russians knew that we had the ability to go get it. And in order for the Russians to be able to do that, they would have to dump billions and billions of dollars that they didn't have because their people were starving. And Russia just said, yeah, we're out, you know. But Star Wars would be to have a series of satellites all positioned all around the planet. And they would have cameras and sensors and some type of arm, whether it's a ray gun or missiles or something, that we would be able to shoot down any missile anywhere on the planet in a moment's notice. Think about that, how that would work. North Korea puts a missile on the stand to get ready to fire. We see the second he puts it on there. We wait until we see the fire. As soon as we see that missile take off, we shoot it down. It doesn't even get into the air. And here's the benefit. If it's a nuclear weapon, the nuclear stuff happens all over his people in his country. If we shoot a nuclear missile out of the air now, it's the nuclear material will land wherever it's shot down at. If we can shoot it down right there in their country, then it's their people that are going to get killed, not innocent people from other countries. Star Wars needs to be started. Now, it's my understanding that it was stopped under the second Bush or slowed down and completely stopped under Obama. My understanding is that Trump has started it, but not full bore. He needs to go full bore on Star Wars. We have the technology to do that. I know we do. We could have that in the air in a couple of years. I'm sure of it. We need to do that. I talked about the anti-aircraft missiles to the Russian border in the countries that are friendly to us. Now, this next one is going to be a military act, but I think it's necessary. We need to totally dominate the airspace over Iran. Now, why? Because Iran is a sponsor of terrorism worldwide. They're allies of Russia. If Russia is going to try to come get us, one of the things that they could do is they could use Iran, as a stopover. Now, logically, the way I would do it is I would come over by Alaska. It's the shortest route to get to the United States, which, by the way, we need to strengthen Alaska up there also with anti-aircraft. But we need to control the airspace. And if we can't go into Iran without starting a war, at least all the airspace completely around Iran, so that nobody comes in and nobody goes out without us knowing and approving. But Iran will be an ally and is an ally of Russia. And if they figure out a way to bypass our sanctions or bypass the blockades, they will use Iran to do that. I'm sure of it. Now, As we have done these things in Russia and we've done them in the other countries, again, I would pull all of the Americans out of Russia. I would pull the non-essential diplomats out of Russia, and I'd kick all Russians out of this country except for the non-essential, all of them. If you're a Russian citizen, you got to go. If you're a Chinese citizen, you got to go. And just like we did with the other countries, we tell Russia, when you pull your equipment and your people out of Venezuela, we will correspondingly lessen the sanctions on your military people. We will pull back equipment. We will pull back military personnel, but not until you pull your people out of Venezuela. And I mean all of your people, all of your advisors, all of your civilians, all of your scientists, all of your oil people, all of your military equipment. Everything got to go. And when we're satisfied that's happened, then we'll go backwards and start taking this stuff off. You can put all the pressure in the world on, but you have to leave an escape valve. Otherwise, it explodes and it becomes a war. We have to give them an option. Pressure, 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 and here's how you can relieve the pressure. That has to be made very plain to these folks. Maximum pressure in all ways, shapes, and form. Social, economic, political, militarily, every way possible. Every bit of pressure to bear. But they have to have an escape valve. Now, lastly, let's talk about Venezuela itself. We've taken, assuming this plan works, we have now taken care of the outside players. Now it's just down to us and Venezuela. One of the things I would do is I would send in special ops. And their goal would be to take out, first off, all military defenses to any military action we might have to take. So that would mean find, locate, and eliminate ground and missile defenses. All radar. Find, locate, and booby trap any military outpost they may have. But I would send in special ops, and I'd send a lot of them in. I would put sanctions on every single one of Maduro's people. For every one of those guys that has a business or something going on in that country, sanction every one of them. That money will mean nothing. Absolutely nothing. You can have $1 trillion, but if you can't spend a dime of it, it means nothing. I would be in contact with the countries around Venezuela, and I would, again, move military and equipment up to the borders on all the countries all the way around, so that if we decide to go in, he's not going to know which way we're coming. We may come one, we may come all, we may come, every other, but he's not going to know that. So what we have to do is put a big show all the way around that country. Naval around the countries, and have them set and ready to go. Because the country is run by socialists, I'm guessing their communication system sucks, just like their electricity sucks and their oil business sucks. So part of the special ops would be to take down command and control. That means find out how they're controlling, who's talking, what means they use, and then be able to destroy that on an hour's notice. I would file charges in the United Nations. Now, that's not going to get anywhere because, like I said, the United Nations is all a bunch of corrupt dictators from around the country. They all sympathize with this guy. So they're not going to authorize anything that the United States says against him. But we do need to file the charges. And the reason we need to do that is so that we can have it on paper of what he's doing down there. Crimes against humanity. He's killing people down there. He's starving his people down there, and he's doing it on purpose. If we don't at least file the charges with the proof that we have, we cannot hold him accountable. And I would also take him to the World Court in The Hague. If we see, right now, I believe they've offered him asylum if he leaves quietly. They won't come after him. They won't kill him. They won't file charges. Just leave the country. And he's turned them down. Okay. All right. If that's what you want, now that offer is off of the table. Now we're going to file charges. And we're going to get you, and you are going to go to jail. Now, whether we do it like we did with Manuel Noriega, we come in and take you to the United States and try you, or you can leave voluntarily and seek asylum where they won't come get you, like in Russia. But we're coming after you. We'll give you 1 more week to change your mind. You could walk away scot-free with the money and leave the country, and we won't come after you. After the week is up, we're coming after you, and we will not stop. We need to determine up front we are not negotiating with this guy. No negotiations. These socialists lie like you breathe, just like the left wing does in this country. They lie with ease, just like Iran did in the nuclear talks over there. Lied like dogs and laughed at us. No negotiation. Like we will do with Cuba, we need to totally isolate this country, a naval blockade so that none of his oil leaves and none of the Russia, China, or Cuban ships get in. We totally isolate. When we put the military around the country, we block every entrance and exit. We put a naval blockade around so no ships get in. Totally isolate them. Another job that the special ops people should put in is be able to secure the oil fields and the gold mines there so that these people don't rape, pillage, and plunder on their way out. Remember, when we came into Iraq, Saddam Hussein tried to blow up the oil mines down there and succeeded in some of them. We got them under control, but after a large loss of oil and time. And it was a scorched earth policy designed to buy him time so that he could retreat. And it worked, actually, because Bush wouldn't go after him. We had to go back in and get him. But we need to make it so that if anything happens, that the special ops will be able to, all of this needs to happen like within a day. They need to be able to shut down command and control, which means they probably need to have it all booby-trapped and reconned out up front. They need to be able to secure the oil fields and the gold mines all in one day, again, which means they need to have personnel, equipment, and traps set. That needs to happen. Now, how they do it, I'm not a military genius. I have no idea. But I know that these things need to happen so that on a day or two notice, we can say, okay, go. And all of a sudden they will be in the dark and out of gold and out of silver and out of people and out of material and out of communication, all just within a day or two. They won't know what hit them. That's where we need to be. Well, as you can tell, I have given this a lot of thought. And I think because of technology and because of the circumstances around the world, I don't think wars are going to be fought like they used to be fought. There will be the military thugs. I mean, and if Trump had been in office when Putin went into the Crimea, it would have been a very easy thing. All we would have had to do was deploy some planes, drop some bombs, and be done with it. But Obama wasn't going to defend that, and Russia knew it. They knew he was a wimp. But as soon as they had aggression and that government asked for help, all we had to do was drop some bombs and it had been done. So for the most part, unless we have a wimp in the White House, battles aren't going to be fought like they were. I mean, one bomb today can take out an entire city if we choose to do that. So I think battles and disputes and all of that are going to be fought more in cyberspace and in outer space. And I do think that Star Wars is a key. Whoever secures space will run this planet. That will happen. I mean, think about it. If you have a satellite over every country and you can monitor every country and you can stop any bomb, any artillery movement, any military advance. I mean, think about if Russia had started to come across the Crimean border, and as soon as the tanks rolled, we shot them. We blew them up from our Star Wars base. When that happens, warfare as we know it is over. And I think we're very close. I just wish it would, the leaders would stop pussyfooting around and then deploy this thing. But the key is going to be imposing as much pressure. In the old days, it was military pressure. But I think a combination of all the pressure, because now we have the technology to take it down and make it up close and personal. So it used to be, if you wanted to put sanctions on, you put a sanction on a country. And the countries just laughed at you because they'd just go to another one of their buddies' countries and they did the same thing. All they had to do was move the material a different way or use the banking system in a different way. They can't do that now because we can follow that money. And if they try to go to their friend, we sanction their friend. And now their friend is trying to go to somewhere else and we sanction them. Now everybody's out of the loop. I think this is how wars are going to be fought in the future. And the plan that I just put forth for each one of these countries exerts the maximum non-aggressive form of pressure on each country with an escape valve. And that's the key. Putting the pressure on is the easy part. Supplying the exhaust valve so that they can leave is the key to making the pressure work. If you put pressure and don't give them a way out, they'll just explode and do really stupid things. But if you put pressure, as the pressure increases, the leaders of the countries are going to say, okay, is this worth it? Is it worth me losing, as an example for Putin? Is it worth me losing 50% of my national income to help Venezuela halfway across the planet? Is it really worth that? Or China saying, is it really worth having my entire Communist Party upset with me because they can't get to their money, so that I can help a country halfway across the planet? Now, they may determine the answer is yes. I don't know. If the answer is yes, as an example with China, then we just keep increasing the tariffs. And that's more and more pressure. And the more we increase them, the worse their economy gets. We only put on a $25 a pound on steel, and they dropped 4%. Their GDP their growth dropped 4% in a year. Another 25%, and they won't grow. An additional 25%, and now they're losing. They know that. And we know that. This is how wars are going to be fought. This is the beginning of it right here. I believe this is how we can do this, and we won't have. Now, worst case scenario, one of these fools makes a stupid choice, and we got to go in there and deal with them militarily. Name one country we can't whip. There's not one. We can take care of every one of these countries without a problem. A nuclear weapon on Moscow and Beijing will end this thing in an hour. They're not that stupid. We just have to find the right combination, the right amount of pressure, and the right relief valve at the right time. When that happens, that's how decisions are made. That's how battles will be fought, and that's how peace will be kept. But like Reagan said, trust and verify. We'll take their word that it happens, but we need to deploy Star Wars so that we can watch the planet and destroy whatever needs to be destroyed at a moment's notice. Well, that's program, everyone. Hopefully by next week, when the time comes to the news stories, I won't be bored to death. But I was just bored to death over the Mueller report and the Democrats, whining and crying and impeach 45 and AOC and all that. I'm just sick of it. We got much bigger problems on this planet to deal with, and Venezuela is one of them. And so instead of worrying about all the minutia, I spent the last 2 weeks thinking about this and how we can deal with this. And I think this is a good idea. So think about it. And let me know what you think. And if you like it, share the program. Let other people know about it. Well, that's program, everyone. You have a blessed week. I look forward to next week when we can sit down and talk about this week in politics.